So yeah, it's just stay tuned into the chat and follow along. So today's conversation will be about LUCHA, and we'll explain exactly what LUCHA stands for. But as the title says, it's about using LUCHA was a project about using public policy and community involvement to create change and affecting the way we use our land and resources and how they're shared with the community. So just to set the throwback, just to set the time period, some of when the work that LUCHA started was Hurricane Dolly. This happened in 2008, and this was one of the biggest storms that hit Texas. I think that year it was Hurricane Ike and Dolly, so different parts of Texas received lots and lots of rain because it was hit by two hurricanes. And I can still remember being stuck in our home for over a week and actually having to dig out little channels in our yard so that we can let the water flow, because there wasn't proper drainage in our colonia. So what happened with Hurricane Dolly was that when colonia residents asked for federal assistance, FEMA was not providing the assistance because they were claiming that the houses were already in decrepit conditions, and because they were already not being properly maintained, that they didn't qualify for federal resources. So this is a quick timeline of a lawsuit that LUPE was a part of with our partners at Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid. And this was a lawsuit that took over almost 10 years before there was a final decision where people actually received payments for the damages that they were initially able to receive, but the federal government decided to discriminate them. And this is a big catalyst because this kind of brought to light the attention of drainage as being a big issue. And for those that have been following along or have seen the last two meetings that we've held, we've talked about the history of struggle and people coming together, first with the melon strike and marching from Rio Grande City up to Austin to bring attention to the injustices in the field. Then last month, we talked about the public lighting campaign and how that brought about leaders that were learning how government worked and how they can advocate for themselves. You had government officials that were telling them, this is something we can't help you with. We have no power. We can't do anything about it. And thanks to the organizing that happened, people or community members learn how the government works. And they started understanding, the process of working with the legislator, the state legislator, to then push the county to be able to do what they're required to do. And Hurricane Dolly brought attention to the drainage issues and how they were also connected to the public lighting issues. And it started this conversation within the community of how they were going to be able to not only deal with public lighting issues and draining issues, but access to healthcare and just equal representation when it came to government entities. So I believe we shared something in the chat, a link to this report, Fighting FEMA and Disaster Response in the Rio Grande Valley. And y'all, if we don't share it now, I can share it later, but this will give you some more insight into what the FEMA battle was and this court case and how important it was. Now I'm going to start a little quick video that was produced by BC Workshop, which was one of the partners that we worked with when we were creating the LUCHA curriculum. So I'm going to go ahead and play this quick video for y'all right now.
There's many problems that people in low-income neighborhoods contend with that middle-class Americans and people of more means never encounter in their days.
The residents, they're suffering from the consequences of lack of infrastructure, of lack of resources, a lack of services that are there. But we're not about just bringing complaints, but we're about making change, and we need solutions.
LUCHA is establishing a new model for civic engagement and community organizing, which I think really points the way toward solutions to a whole range of fundamental problems in this country.
It's an opportunity for colonia leaders to be able to get technical expertise on issues of concern of their community, and also get that support and knowledge that they need to be able to better advocate for their communities.
So LUCHA has a couple of different delivery mechanisms, but basically it's taking technical information, boiling it down to a level that your average resident can understand, and sharing that with them. Topic areas are governance, drainage, housing, public services, and planning and development.
Everything that we do as an organization is grassroots, right? Like, we never come up with anything and enforce it on our members, on our leaders. And so this campaign, the members have been involved in identifying the topics that the community that we organize in wants to learn about.
We believe in not doing for the people what the people can do for themselves. So by us being this bridge, then we can help connect our community with other groups, and then they can continue doing for their own community what needs to happen.
Most of us don't have to build this type of intimate relationship with government programs and knowledge of those programs that the LUCHA residents have to do. But when you're bypassed and you're excluded from those services from the beginning, and when you suffer from discrimination, then you have to do work that's much more difficult than everybody else has to do just to get what everybody else gets just as a natural thing.
The impact that we're seeing is the interest, right? And other members wanting to gain that knowledge. And when we invite people from the outside, or when there's meetings, the LUCHA leaders stand out, right? Because they know what they're talking about and they own it.
Bueno, fue enriquecedora, ya que me ayudó a elevar mi conocimiento, y a aprender más de las necesidades, no solamente de mi comunidad, sino a nivel del valle. Se sigue trabajando como empezó, seguir retando a los líderes y a otras personas a seguir aprendiendo, desarrollándose, va a tener mucho éxito siempre y cuando siga trabajando como empezó.
LUCHA is a process of civic engagement of people who suffer from systemic discrimination. And in this political environment that we're in this country, there is no one thing more important that we should do than support the efforts of people who are marginalized, who are not participating in the process, who are discriminated against, to step up and feel like they have a stake in our government and in making change that affects their lives.
Yeah, and that was just a short video that kind of talks about the overview of LUCHA. If you noticed in the pictures, you might have recognized Josue. He was in a couple of the pictures. Josue was involved in the LUCHA program deeply. Josue, can you introduce yourself real quickly and describe your role within LUCHA?
Sure. Thanks, Sergio. Thank you for having me. That was like a throwback. That was truly brought tears to my eyes. But my name is Josue Ramirez. I am the cultural organizer for LUCHA RGV. I was previously the co-director for Texas Housers, which was the organization that I was leading the efforts through in the LUCHA work. And my work there revolved around basically being a liaison between community and policy advocates and the elected officials that were doing all that. But yeah, anything else that I might miss?
No worries, no worries. I know Lucha was a big project. And like I mentioned earlier, you know, it was work that's been going on for a long time where people are engaged civically, talking not only to their county representatives or city representatives, their state representatives, and even in some cases, their federal representatives. And it's about people seeing the power of being engaged in the process, the political and government process in order to bring about change. So, you know, you mentioned that you did work with Lucha. I know here I'm showing a picture of FEMA representatives going to a colonia meeting after Dali, and the colonia members were talking about what happened, you know, where the drainage was happening, and part of the Hurricane Dali settlement was that the Texas General Land Office allocated funds to the Texas Water Development Board to study the drainage needs in the colonias. But when the TWD released the study that they were planning, they were only included about 100 colonias out of the 1,200 colonias in Hidalgo. So the state of Texas was planning on studying areas that weren't even classified as colonias. In one of the articles written by Texas Observer, Holding Back the Flood, you talk about colonia members or luchistas hatching a plan to make sure that their colonias were included in the study. Can you tell us more about what happened with the study and why it was such important for the members to be a part of the study?
Sure, and let me go back and just talk a little bit about my role about in Lucha. So in Lucha, my role was to help basically the community residents understand the issues that, or the curriculum that was being developed. I basically was their teacher professor, along with Esther, who basically was the person doing the organizing. And through that organizing, we identified drainage as one of the key issues. So through people's comments like, every time it rains, we have to, you know, it floods, or, you know, my kids have to wrap bags around their shoes to go walk to the bus stop when it rains. And so through issues like that, or through comments like that, we identified as drainage as one of the huge, bigger issues. And we started to identify with the community residents opportunities that might arise for us to engage around drainage issues and things that might impact the development of drainage in the colonias. And as Sergio mentioned, the General Land Office was required through the conciliation agreement that the organization that I worked for, Texas Housers, sued them for and ended up getting an agreement. And so that agreement required that the Texas General Land Office develop a study to finally understand what the issues of drainage were in the colonias. And when they started doing that, we thought that's great, but then they came back with a really bad study that, as Sergio mentioned, was not adequate enough to really portray the issues of drainage in the colonias. And we knew what the issues were. We had been talking about them for weeks. And so when I presented this revealing presentation about, you know, what the state thought the issues around drainage were in the colonias, and they basically presented these 100 places that some of them weren't even colonias, the residents thought, hey, we can really make an impact here, and have them actually assess the drainage in our communities. And so they chose that as a thing that they could organize around, and that they wanted to see changes in, because they understood that in order for them to go to their community or to their county resident or their county commissioners and tell them, hey, I need you to fix my drainage, that they would need to know what was up with the drainage, and that this study by the state would allow them to have some of those tools to tell their county commissioner, hey, according to this study by the state, this is what the conditions are in my colonia, this is what you need to do to fix them. And so they knew that that kind of tool was on the line for them to really make a case for their colonias and for their communities. And they knew that the company that was making this study as it was not doing an adequate job. They were getting paid millions of dollars to come up with a study, and what they came up with was bogus. And so the residents decided, hey, we're going to get involved in this and we're going to start organizing around it. And so that's how the one of our key organizing points, which was, hey, let's get them to redo the study and to actually do it adequately. And actually, what does that mean to you all? What do you all want to see in that study? And what does it mean for the state to actually know what's going on in drainage in the colonias? And so that's how a key part of our organizing happened.
Yeah, and I think that's important, right? That the community members were part of the process. As you can see in the pictures that I was sharing in the presentation, there was a lot of maps that they were studying, right? They were looking at aerial maps and studying where the water collects and the topography. And they were studying this so that when they spoke to county commissioners who said they couldn't do anything about it, you know, they had the information and knowledge to tell them, well, you can do something about it, right? You need to use the power that you have. I think one of the luchistas, Eva Carranza, talks about that, you know, how before LUCHA, they would go to county commissioners court and they would express their grievances and issues that they were dealing with, only to have the county commissioners say, well, we can't do anything about that. And it was through LUCHA and learning about how these agencies and government work together that they were able to really bring about changes and see that they do have power, right?
Yeah, not only that, but that the county and the state have a requirement to do certain things. And that, I mean, yeah, and it's part of that process to get comments from people, you know, and that is their in to really get their voices heard, and that they needed to understand the process too, and the players. So that was all part of the conversation too, is like, what's the process look like? If he tells us this is, we can't do that, okay, well, let's understand why they can't do that. And also let's understand why they should do that, because that was a lot of the part, is like, these residents would, you know, go to meetings with commissioners, and the commissioners would tell them, no, we can't do that because the engineers tell us that. And then the residents would be like, well, actually, our engineers told us that you could mitigate that by doing this, or by, you know, increasing the pipe to a bigger standard so there could be more flow out of the thing, or things like that, you know. So they were understanding that just like the commissioners could say, oh, you know, we have our set of experts, they could also say, oh, well, we have a set of experts that also is helping us. And so the conversation kept happening. It wasn't just like a stop, you know, where usually it was like, that's what it was when they said, oh, we have professionals looking at this, and that's where it stopped, because professionals will take care of it, right? But as we knew in the county, that wasn't always the case for the benefit of the colonia residents. And so, yeah, they knew that they had other people on their side too.
Yeah, and just to give the people here context of like the time frame, this didn't happen overnight, right? So Hurricane Dolly hit in 2008, and through the years, there was conversations and trainings. I believe that the state plan happened in 2008, but it wasn't until, you know, 2011 when the county finally was able to push, or the residents were finally able to push the county to create a drainage and housing improvements plan. And even some of the pictures that I'm about to show you are from like 2012, right? So this is a process that took time and took a lot of trainings. Part of this history deals with these neighborhood plan and improvement strategies that were created. Now this is before the final LUCHA project, but this is kind of a prerequisite of what LUCHA came to be. Can you tell us a little bit more about like how the other issues came about, because Lucha is more than just drainage, right? It's a bigger curriculum. How did y'all decide what else was on the curriculum?
For sure. So LUCHA stands for Land Use Colonia Housing Action. So a lot of the issues that surrounded that arose with community members were things like, oh, we don't have lights at night. So, we can't enjoy our neighborhood when the sun goes down, and we don't have sidewalks. And actually, our streets aren't even paved right, and there's no drainage. And so a lot of the things that we saw dealt around land use particularly, and not necessarily around so the underlying issue was land use, right? What was being done on top of the ground, and who had the right to do certain things around it. And so that's where the umbrella of Land Use Colonia Housing Action came from, because land use is that, but then there's also housing, which is what we do on top of the land, right? And so we knew that also it was really important to know that land use regulations, because when we went to county commissioners or drainage, the drainage district folks, they always told us, oh, well, for example, to give a colonia lighting, we need to make sure that that there's enough drainage. So why are we going to put lighting in a community that we know is going to flood, right? And our investment is not going to be worth it. And so we knew that for the county to go in and make certain improvements, there was a process to do so. And we needed planners to do that, to understand, okay, what needs to happen. And that included actual community planners, and also landscape architects, and things like that. And they developed these individualized colonia plans. So in order for us to think, okay, how can we think about what is holistically wrong with a community, we have to actually assess it and understand that. And so through these individual community plans, they were able to do that for individual colonias. So for a specific colonia, so I don't know, Las Palmas or something. I don't know if there's a colonia Las Palmas. I should know these, but it's been a while. But we had a whole plan of okay, to make the improvements to this community, you have to do this, right? You have to fix the drainage, you have to do an easement. These are the options for what do you call it, making a sidewalk or making it safer to walk, things like that. And so through that process, the residents knew, hey, we have the ability actually to think about and imagine what our communities can look like, what our colonias can look like. And that idea of community planning and that development process helped them think that, hey, we shouldn't only be able to, if we can do this for each individual colonia, then this can happen for the county as a whole. And so I think that those localized projects help them point to the possibilities of what could be. And then also to the process of well, this is how we put something like that together. And so that really helped. And then later on, we were able to say, well, then now that we have that went into the drainage study. So for example, that helped them say, oh, this is the kind of stuff that we want in a drainage study. When you put out the drainage study, you should tell us what kind of pipes we need for our thing to connect to the larger drainage system. And so there was just a lot of learning that went on in those planning processes that allowed residents to understand what could be possible at the larger scale.
Yeah, and I want to highlight that this was a collaborative effort, between different organizations that or different nonprofits and people that specialize in different aspects, right? LUPE and Arise were more of the community engagement, building leadership and having community members being active, but we had engineers, we had architects, we had people that had been working in housing, not only here in the Valley, but in Austin and other parts of Texas, creating plans and designs and collaborating in order to make these possible, right? Just like you mentioned earlier that the county had their experts, well, we needed to have our experts too, right? So it definitely took a village.
No, yeah, definitely. And I think that was part of the benefit too, is that we found, I mean, to make these plans work, you need all these players, right, in general, except that community members never really had access to that. And so basically the policy advocates, the community development, and the corporation people, and then the designers all became like literally, or the community residents became what we would usually think of as our clients. And I mean, we were doing work for them. But it was, yeah, so everything revolved around what the needs of the community were. And I don't think that the community residents had had that opportunity to utilize those resources because they hadn't become available for them necessarily. And for us as organizations, we also didn't realize that we could have such an impact by collaborating with, designers and with planners and community development experts. And that went from like, developing this curriculum to actually developing like building houses and putting that stuff in place. And so, yeah, I think that it was a learning process for everybody. I think it was like a whole, collaboration. Also, a benefit of that was that we were kind of like an amorphous blob where one thing or one expert could take the lead on a certain place and then meld back into the blob, and then the organizer just would take over, and then everybody would follow, and then yeah, so it was just like everybody took leadership where they needed to, and pushed where they needed to advance this project and this idea that residents should have access and should be a part of the whole process around community development and housing.
Yeah, and the first LUCHA, or as described by DC Workshop, LUCHA 1.0, was just 15 individuals, right? It was like they were taking a college course, and they were and y'all were teaching them as much as you could, right? So it was a lot of creating these, I don't want to say curriculum, but learning about these issues that they cared about, and making sure that they were as informed as possible and that they were talking to experts. And part of that was learning how the government works, and taking not just learning what the county can do, but just learning about just the way the whole nation works.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what we realized quickly was that that if we really wanted this group project to work, that we needed to have everybody kind of not on the same level, but at least understanding basic things. And we realized that community residents don't have that because of systemic, issues, disenfranchisement, and so and just life. A lot of the people that we work with or immigrants themselves were, I mean, all of our curriculum took place, or was in Spanish, except when we were meeting with people, and we had to be the translators and develop work like that. But basically we had to really help with like basic stuff, like what is government. I mean, we take that stuff for granted, but colonia residents really don't know what's going, or a lot of colonia residents, especially the folks that the leaders that we were working with, didn't necessarily understand what the systems of checks and balances are, who is, how does a law get passed, things like that. And in addition to like, okay, what does drainage look like? So they really had to learn like a long gambit of like basic stuff, but also what we consider basic, but also like things that people take for granted because they experienced it. And so things like, what do you call it? I don't know, like, just understanding that, yeah, that there's different, what do you call it, levels, like the county government versus like the city government, what dictates all that kind of stuff, things around the county budget, the city budget, who's responsible for certain things. This was all the information that we had to work with colonia residents and community leaders through. like you mentioned, the first year was just kind of like a big listening session, and then us kind of us having a conversation. Okay, what is it that in drainage that you feel is important for you? And then through those conversations, understanding, okay, well, we need to know about why does the valley flood in general. Okay, so we learned about the floodplain issues. We learned about, what kind of soil there is and why that, it causes some of the flooding. So we learned a little bit of everything. And then after the first cohort, we really were able to take what we learned and say, okay, let's use everything that we just did this first year and let's put it into something that these community leaders can take to other leaders and share with. And so the idea of the train the trainer was kind of what was happening there, is that they were training ourselves, we were training ourselves to how we wanted to talk to other people about these issues. And then once we had that outlined, then we turned to the planners and say, hey, put this in something that we can take to residents and have them look at and have them understand, but also have it be not too overwhelming, because we cannot do a year of like continuous meetings with regular residents. And so this is where the idea of this curriculum came from. And it's basically I guess levels of understanding of certain issues and how they interconnect. The idea is that we would take them to each house meeting, and that through these house meetings, we would go through the curriculum. And that was generally the case.
And that was kind of the final iteration of LUCHA, right? It was that these community members maxed out all the information that they had. They used this information to push for the county to pass a drainage plan. Right. Later on, they even had the county or pressure the county to push for market subdivision rules, and which are just rules that any new subdivision would have to adhere to. And this is all because they understood that the government had this power, right? Even if they still have to deal with some of these issues, they can make sure that anybody who buys a home or who's moving into a new colonia doesn't have to deal with this anymore, right? And kind of get rid of what we know as a colonia moving forward. And this is all gonna be available online in English and Spanish. So what I'm sharing right now on the presentation is the actual curriculum. This is just one of the curriculums, which is on drainage. And each section has different levels so that you can slowly share this information with people and not overwhelm them, right? I did want to ask about the importance of teaching about our history and inequality, because something that I noticed that was going on was that there was a lot of pláticas or conversations and leadership development that was happening, right? These community members weren't just being given information about how the government worked, but they were also talking about the history of inequality, right? And that, how important do you think that was in order to keep people engaged?
Well, I think it was really important because they saw the patterns, right, and of themselves in history, and they saw the potential in history too through the organizing. So, going through the history of organizing, the history of how it was that we got there to where we were right now, right? Why is it the conditions of colonias exist in the first place, and tying it to structural inequity and to discrimination and to the history of the Rio Grande Valley, which is based on that. It was really important. Not only that, but I think also conversations around just general, what do you call inequities. So we did trainings around, internalized racism, for example. We did issues on, what do you call it, on being a public speaker. So we knew that folks had to, talk to residents and talk to their commissioners, but a lot of people didn't know how to do that. They've just never been put in that place. And so we knew that we had to talk to or teach folks You know, how do you feel more comfortable speaking in public? How do you feel more comfortable understanding that the issues that we are facing are, you know, issues of disenfranchisement, and how is it that we ourselves are implicit in the system? And so it was a lot of that conversation too. It was not just teaching people about drainage, but it was like teaching folks about leadership development, right? It's like, how do you talk to folks? How do you connect to people? How do we connect this to the larger conversations about equity in the, you know, in the Valley and Texas and in general? And so that was a large part of it too. And I think it was part of the bonding experience too, because we were all learning. And so it was cool to have those conversations with folks.
Yeah, and this is something that's still, these conversations are still going on, right? This was a curriculum that was created over years, and this information is still being shared with new community members that are coming into the organization or organizing for the first time. I know this information right now is helping one particular colonia or neighborhood deal with issues with the county. They're planning on paving streets, but sometimes or often the county doesn't talk to the drainage district to make sure that there's proper drainage before they put these streets, right? And also dealing with street lights, especially right now when they have all this funding from Build Back, but Build Back and all the COVID relief funds. Right now, it's important that these government agencies are working together to make sure that they're providing what the community needs. But if the community wasn't being active in it, it could be that these resources would be misused. And it could be that they pave the streets before they do the drainage, and then they have to tear the streets up so that they can put the drainage, and then they don't have money to fix the streets after it was torn up. So these lessons are still being shared with community members, and this curriculum was shared on the chat. It's available both in English and Spanish, and it's one that we use to kind of share that same knowledge that was created over years with new people that are organizing. Before I open it up for questions, I wanted to ask Josue, is there a memory or a moment that really stands out about LUCHA? I know LUCHA took place, took place at a certain time frame, but I think it's bigger than that. And if anybody has any more questions, we can definitely answer, and we'll share all this information continuing after this meeting. But before we open up to questions, is there something that stands out, Josue, from the time you were part of LUCHA?
Every the people that I met, seeing stuff actually go from idea to like completion. Like I feel like this was like my first job coming out of college, and I felt like I really was naive as far as like the whole process for making in this case like policy advocacy, right? But I felt like this really gave me a true sense of what good policy development should look like. It gave me a good sense of like what a process that is people focused, ideally looks like, and the barriers that you could face. But yeah, that ultimately it made changes. I think you mentioned that we changed the model subdivision rules for Hidalgo County, which is like, it dictates the whole county, and which is the biggest county with colonias in it. And so in hindsight, we really did have an impact on the landscape of the Valley, and hopefully for the future, for the benefit. And then also just the way that community residents interact with their local government. Like I know now that residents talk to their community or their county commissioner, and they talk to the drainage district, whereas before those were really just, they were out of bounds. No one could reach those people. And it's been because of a change of of administration, but also because people pushed and because we let them know, hey, we know what you're doing and what you're doing is not cool and it needs to change for the benefit of everybody else. And it seems like they've listened, and it's really great to see that that's continuing.
And sure, it's definitely seen a culture change where county commissioners are now know that they have to talk to community members and have their input and are looking for it, because at the end of the day, that's where the resources are going, right, to these neighborhoods, to these people's lives, and it's important that they are part of the process. So I'm going to go ahead and stop recording right now, and then we'll open it up for questions.